Coming into the 2018-2019 NBA season, I was unsure of what to expect. LeBron James and the Los Angeles Lakers have been the talk of the town ever since LeBron decided to go to LA. And with the supporting cast contained, how should I put this, a very unique variety of personalities? Who wouldn't be talking about the Lakers? LA versus Golden State. That's what a majority of NBA fans were looking forward to, as well as the performances that we could expect from touted rookies such as Luka Doncic, DeAndre Ayton, and Trae Young. But rookies are more or less something to look out for every season. What made the beginning of this season so special once again was the prospect of a 7-game series between LeBron James and the Los Angeles Lakers and his nemesis Stephen Curry and the Golden State Warriors. Turns out that maybe expectations were just a tad bit too high for LeBron and the Lakers, as they didn't even make the playoffs. Granted, it was for a variety of reasons, but that's not what we are here to discuss. What we are here to discuss is all of the great and memorable performances that did happen over these past 8 to 9 months. The performances that left us dazzled, the performances that left us inspired, the performances that left us questioning everything we thought we knew about the hierarchy of the NBA, performances that broke records, and even performances that broke hearts. In a season that saw over 20 50-point games, selecting the ones that were the most memorable surely wasn't easy, but without further ado, here they are. 5 of the most memorable performances from the 2018-2019 NBA season. Growing up, Tracy McGrady scoring 13 points in 35 seconds to lead the Houston Rockets to a miraculous comeback win over the San Antonio Spurs was among my favorite NBA moments. Not only did it help cement my love for the game, but it also catapulted Tracy McGrady to the top of my favorite players list. Seeing him go fearlessly against all odds and will his team to win in a game that most had already deemed to be over was the coolest thing ever. I still remember the stunned look on the face of the Spurs players as Yao Ming and company smothered McGrady where he stood, McGrady letting out a ferocious roar as if he was still holding the beating heart of the Spurs in his hands. In terms of individual comeback performances, there may have been none better. However, while that might be the case for overall individual comeback performances, when it comes to comeback performances as a rookie, off the top of my head, I can't think of many better than what Luka Doncic was able to accomplish on December 8th in a Texas showdown versus the Houston Rockets. This was a game early on in the season between two teams who, before the start of the season, were supposed to be polar opposites in terms of competitiveness in the Western Conference, with the Houston Rockets being the team that pushed Golden State to the edge in the Western Conference Finals the year before, as were the Dallas Mavericks were coming off a season that won't be remembered too fondly in Dallas history. A year where they only won 24 games. However, before the start of this game, you'd have been hard pressed to tell that one team was a bottom feeder in the league last year, while the other had just fallen one game shy of reaching the finals, as the Rockets to start the season were having a hard time regaining the form that they displayed in the past, entering the night with a record of just 11-13. On the other hand, the Dallas Mavericks were actually experiencing some level of success early on in the season, as they entered the game with a respectable record of 12-11, not even a third of the way through the year, and they already had half as many wins as the year before. And of course, a lot of the success that the Dallas Mavericks were having to start the season was because of Luka Doncic, the sweet shooting 6'7" Slovenian forward with point guard abilities alongside one of the highest basketball IQs in the league. For a 19-year-old rookie who was still trying to get used to the steering wheel being located on the left side of the car, he was already regarded by many as an all-star caliber player. As for those who are still holding out and waiting to see more from Doncic before believing the hype, well, this game might have helped show them just how great Doncic already was. As with 3 minutes remaining in a game between Texas rivals, once again a game against one of the premier point guards in the league in Chris Paul, as well as the reigning MVP in James Harden, and with the Dallas Mavericks trailing by 8 points, Luka dominated, momentarily transcending every other player on the court as if he was Tracy McGrady so many years before against the Spurs, scoring 11 points and connecting on all 4 of his field goal attempts during that stretch. Corner threes, step backs, didn't matter. Luka was feeling it, and that is regardless of him having a tough night leading up to that point. As before his late fourth quarter explosion, Luka was a miserable 3 of 13 from the field and 0 of 4 from 3. And for a rookie, with only a hair over 20 games under his belt, to be able to exude that type of confidence in a late game situation against a team as talented as Houston Well, that leaves no question that he deserves this spot amongst the greatest moments the NBA saw during the regular season. If you talk to anyone who has found success playing basketball or any other sport for that matter, they will tell you that above all, confidence is key. That there will be times in which your shot isn't falling, or maybe you're just not playing as well as you know you're capable of playing, but as long as you don't lose confidence in yourself, you'll be fine. Enter Klay Thompson, one of the greatest shooters that the league has ever seen. Mr. I scored 60 points on 12 dribbles. Opposing coaches have lost countless hours of sleep trying to figure out ways to limit the effectiveness of Klay's ability to move without the ball and get open before he splashes an effortless three in the face of his defender. The start of this past season was a bit different for Klay though. Even though he was coming off a season where he hit a blistering 44% of his attempts from beyond the arc, the start of the season saw Klay Thompson hit just 5 of his first 35 3-point attempts, a paltry 14%. And for most people, that would have been enough for them to lose every last ounce of confidence that they had in themselves. They get in their head and psych themselves out, start passing up on shots that they would normally take without hesitation. 5 of 35 from 3 throughout his first 7 games, something clearly must have been wrong with Klay. And that is what some people were thinking as well. However, most people who knew anything about being in a shooting slump, especially a shooting slump as massive as the one Klay Thompson was in, knew that it was only a matter of time before he erupted. And for the guy who once again scored 60 points on 12 dribbles and in less than 30 minutes, well, may God have mercy upon the soul of whatever team was unfortunate enough to be on the other side of Klay's breakout game.
I didn't even realize what was happening record-wise until they called a timeout. He had made a couple in the second half, and I heard Klay saying, two more. And that's when I realized, and I didn't even know who had the record, and so I asked Steph, I go, do you have the record? He goes, yeah. And so I'm a little slow.
The Golden State Warriors were coming off consecutive games in which both Stephen Curry and Kevin Durant delivered monster performances. Kevin Durant had just dropped 41 points in Madison Square Garden, and it only took 3 quarters for Curry to give the Wizards 51 reasons why they weren't going to be making the playoffs the night prior. Golden State was rolling as they flew into Chicago to take on Zach LaVine and the Bulls. LaVine also in the midst of his early season tear in which he was scoring at least 30 points every single night. But remember how I said, may God have mercy upon the soul of the team that Klay Thompson found his rhythm against? Well, he didn't, as it didn't take too long this game to tell that this was going to be another one of those nights for Thompson. He had only made 5 threes in the 7 games leading up to this point, but none of that mattered as he connected on 5 threes alone in the first quarter. The Chicago Bulls were getting roasted on their home court by one player alone. Play after play, Klay Thompson either brought the ball up the floor only to splash in one of the eyes of the defender, or was found coming off screens before he connected with his quick release. Shot after shot hit the bottom of the net until no one even remembered that Klay was struggling before the start of the game. The damage eventually resulting in the Warriors defiling the Chicago Bulls by almost scoring 150 points in regulation. Klay Thompson responsible for 52 of those points, including setting a record for the most threes in the game with 14, passing his backcourt mate Stephen Curry, who was the previous record holder with 13 threes. And once again, Thompson did all of his damage in under 30 minutes of action. It wasn't too long ago that Russell Westbrook was the darling of the NBA. After Kevin Durant spurned Russell Westbrook and the rest of the NBA by deciding to join with the Golden State Warriors back during the summer of 2016, Russell Westbrook was the player whom everyone wanted to succeed. After all, Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook were viewed as brothers on the court and off it. They always seemed to have each other's back. So when Kevin Durant just up and left his closest comrade to sign with the enemy, of course we as the fans were going to be rooting for Westbrook and the Thunder to beat Durant. Even the media that Russell Westbrook himself despises so much felt some level of empathy towards Westbrook, as during the season after Durant left, when Westbrook went out and averaged a triple-double over the course of all 82 regular season games, he was still bestowed the crown of the league's MVP, even though his team finished as just the 6th seed in the Western Conference. Unfortunately though, the love that Westbrook received from the media and the fans didn't last much longer than that. Even though he would go on to average a triple-double the next season as well, Westbrook found himself on the receiving end of hate now instead of love, with fans clamoring that the playstyle of Westbrook just wasn't conducive to winning. After all, he had now been eliminated from the first round of the playoffs 2 straight times, the latter time by rookie Donovan Mitchell. And that is regardless of the Thunder trying to get Westbrook more help before the start of the season by trading for all-star forward Paul George, as well as acquiring Carmelo Anthony from the New York Knicks. Ball hog, shot chucker, stat patter. When it comes to insults directed towards Russ's game, he's heard it all. triple-doubles no longer impressed a fan base that had become jaded by the sheer amount of triple-doubles they'll be posting by not just Westbrook alone anymore, but by more players across the league as well, some of them even able to post far more efficient triple-doubles than Westbrook himself. All of that would change though on April 2nd of 2019. The world was mourning the death of LA-based rapper and activist Nipsey Hussle, as he had just been shot to death on March 31st. This was a massive blow to everyone who knew him, as he was a pillar in the community who was always focused on giving back to the community that raised him. The LA police commissioner even sharing after Nipsey's death that the two of them were set to have a meeting with Roc Nation the following day about how they could put an end to gang violence and help the nation's youth. It was a death that truly caused a shockwave around the league, and especially amongst the LA-based NBA players such as Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and even Russell Westbrook himself.
Just a historic performance tonight. The first player since Wilt Chamberlain to have 20 points, 20 rebounds, and 20 assists. Russ, talk about the emotions, talk about your...
Russell Westbrook and the OKC Thunder were set to take on LeBron James and the Los Angeles Lakers. Just a typical regular season game that no one was paying too much attention to, especially since by then, LeBron James and the Lakers were no longer seen as a threat in the Western Conference, as a host of injuries as well as chemistry problems since the All-Star break had now placed the Lakers on the outside of the playoffs looking in. Meanwhile, the Thunder were in the midst of another typical post-Kevin Durant season, as even though Paul George himself was having a career year, the Thunder as a whole, even though they were still a playoff team, weren't really deemed to be serious threats to Golden State. And had it not been for the death of Nipsey Hussle a few days prior, then more than likely this game would have still been viewed as nothing more than just a typical regular season game. However, because of Nipsey's death, Russell Westbrook was out to send a message. After all, this game was taking place in LA, the home of Westbrook, and the city that Nipsey gave his everything to in order to improve it. Which is why Westbrook knew coming into this that this would be no ordinary game for him, as he would use this game to honor the life of the lost icon, tallying a triple-double the likes of which the NBA hadn't seen since the days of Wilt Chamberlain, as Westbrook would go on to score 20 points, grab 20 rebounds, and dish out 21 assists to commemorate the passing of one of the people that he looked up to the most. Early in the video, I mentioned how Tracy McGrady, scoring 13 points in 35 seconds to lead the Houston Rockets to a comeback win over the San Antonio Spurs, was among my favorite all-time NBA moments. When I think of iconic performances in which I was both alive and old enough to remember, that is one of the first ones that comes to my mind. Another very iconic moment that I remember, however, will be Kobe Bryant scoring 60 points in his final game against the Utah Jazz. For a player who had previously scored at least 60 points on 5 different occasions, Kobe logging his 660th point game during his career finale was nothing short of poetic. And in a way, the performance that Derrick Rose put on this past Halloween was maybe even more poetic than the one Kobe put on in his finale. Derrick Rose, one of the most loved, cherished, and respected players in the league today, a player who at just 22 years old, the same age as some rookies enter the NBA, became the youngest MVP that the league had ever seen. A player whose potential at the point guard spot was unrivaled at the time. His gravity-defying acrobatic finishes around the rim were a thing of beauty. There wasn't a person alive who didn't want to see Rose succeed. Unfortunately though, Rose's time atop the league was cut short. Very short, as in 2012, during a game of the first round of the playoffs against the Philadelphia 76ers, a game which was by all means over already. Rose suffered the first of many injuries that he would sustain over the course of his career. Hamstrings, wrists, ankles, necks, toes, back, knees, elbows. There was no part of Rose's body that didn't either break, sprain, or strain. Throughout his career, Derrick Rose battled injury after injury, all with the hopes that eventually he'd be able to once again return to the player that he was. However, most of the time, Rose's attempts to regain his former form only left him unable to play once again, and the battles that Rose faced merely trying to play the game that he loved eventually peaked during the 2017-2018 NBA season. Derrick Rose was a member of the Cleveland Cavaliers, a team that will go down as one of the most dysfunctional teams in league history. Kyrie Irving had just been traded from Cleveland to Boston in exchange for an injured Isaiah Thomas, and in hopes to rebuild a championship contender on the fly around LeBron James, the Cavs recruited the help of seasoned stars such as Dwayne Wade and Derrick Rose, and at the time, people were buying it. Dwayne Wade might not have been the same Dwayne Wade from his playing time alongside LeBron in Miami, but he still managed to average over 18 points per game for the Bulls the season prior. And Derrick Rose, while he may have never gotten back to his old form, was for sure a player who could have a big impact coming off the bench, as he also averaged 18 points per game with the Knicks before signing with Cleveland. Add to that the prospect of a healthy Isaiah Thomas, who finished top 5 in MVP voting, and LeBron James and company might have had a shot at actually competing with Golden State this time. We all know that it didn't quite turn out that way though. That group of players that the Cleveland Cavaliers assembled on the fly was a complete mess. A mess that resulted in half of the roster being traded away right before the NBA trade deadline. Dwayne Wade made his way back to Miami, Isaiah Thomas was sent to the Lakers, and Rose, after initially being traded to the Jazz, wound up with his former coach Tom Thibodeau in Minnesota. One thing that gets forgotten about that year though was the fact that for a period of time, Derrick Rose was semi-retired from the NBA. After suffering another ankle injury with Cleveland, Rose was ready to call it quits, saying that he was tired of constantly being injured and that he could no longer deal with the mental ups and downs that come from being injured. I mean, when you've been hurt as much as Rose had, the anxiety that you get from just wanting to make it through the night without sustaining another injury had to be draining. What was really sad about all this though was the fact that Rose was still only 29 years old. 29. That is the age in which most players experience the best years of their career, right smack dab in the middle of their prime. And for Rose, had it not been for all of the injuries, it could have meant once again having a chance to compete for a championship while also being paid the big bucks that teams have been throwing at the players. Instead though, 29 for Rose seemed more like 40. Playing mostly off the bench on minute restrictions, and instead of having the Brinks truck back to the driveway of his multi-million-dollar mansion, Rose was being paid the veteran's minimum. A former MVP, 29 years old, and making less than players on rookie scale contracts. I don't think anyone would have blamed Rose if he did walk away from the game and never returned. But there's a saying that goes, the night is always darkest right before the dawn. And for Rose, with things now being at an all-time low for him in his career, the only way he could go was up. So now fast forward to this past Halloween. Derrick Rose and the Minnesota Timberwolves were set to take on Donovan Mitchell and the Utah Jazz. Ironically, the same team that Kobe faced during his final performance, as well as the team that Michael Jordan hit arguably the most iconic shot in NBA history against. Lots of iconic moments happened against Utah for some reason, I suppose, and Rose was just destined to add to this list, as after 7 years of trying to regain the form that he had when he became the league's youngest MVP, Rose put on the best performance of his career, scoring a career-high 50 points to get the Wolves the win. Even came up with a potential game-saving block in the game's final seconds. Once again, this was a player who the season prior was contemplating giving it all up and walking away. A player who was at the end of his rope, and despite all that, he still came back and delivered one of the most inspirational performances of all time. The NBA can be a cruel place. As a player, one day you can be basking in the glory and the praise from the fans in the city that you love on a team with championship aspirations, and then the very next day find yourself being written off, injury prone, too old, not as good as he used to be, and on a team who at best could only hope to make the playoffs. For Blake Griffin, that was his reality, as even though he was once part of the famous Lob City trio, Griffin now found himself as a member of the Detroit Pistons. And while they might be my personal favorite team, there is no sugarcoating the fact that had he not been traded to Detroit by the Clippers, only months after signing a long-term contract with the Clippers, that the thought of playing for a team like Detroit would never have even crossed Griffin's mind, especially since the Pistons as an organization had been struggling to find their footing in the league since the mid-2000s. This was all made even worse by the fact that prior to the start of the season, the slander against Griffin's on-court abilities were at an all-time high, with games such as NBA 2K19 rating second-year players like Jason Tatum ahead of him, and that's not even a mention the slack he was getting from the fans, as many found themselves questioning whether or not there was even a spot for a player like Griffin in the league anymore. Yeah, Blake Griffin was a far cry from feeling the same love that he was receiving during his come-up as one of the league's best.
We just kept fighting, man. We kept taking punches. At halftime, I said this wasn't going to be a game where, the person who punches the most wins is going to be the person who can take the most punches.
The Detroit Pistons were set to take on the Philadelphia 76ers. The Sixers coming off a year in which they had just reached the second round of the playoffs. And now with an even more experienced Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, they were expected to once again be one of the frontrunners to emerge victorious in the Eastern Conference. While the Pistons, on the other hand, like I mentioned, have been struggling to find their footing in the league ever since the going to work era of Chauncey Billups and Ben Wallace. And with what has been the case for the past year, this was supposed to be a matchup between Andre Drummond and Joel Embiid, a matchup that was growing even more toxic by the day. That is, if you were Andre Drummond at least, as the trolling that Joel Embiid had been doing to Drummond every time Philly beat Detroit had clearly been taking a toll on Drummond's mental state, with Embiid proclaiming to the entire NBA world on numerous occasions that he has free real estate in the mind of Dre. And for Drummond, it appeared that history was about to repeat itself in this game, as to start the game he was struggling to do anything against Embiid, missing countless of point-blank shots at the rim while also having trouble defending Embiid on the other end without fouling. It was clear that Drummond wanted to do everything in his power to make sure that the Pistons didn't fall victim to Joel Embiid again, but Drummond himself wouldn't be able to stop what was seemingly inevitable. Luckily for Drummond though, Blake Griffin had his back, as Griffin almost single-handedly took on the task of making sure that the Pistons would be at least able to put up a fight against Philly. Time and time again down the court, the ball found itself in the hands of Blake Griffin, looking to make a score in order to respond to the Sixers scoring at the other end. And whether it be backing his man down, pulling his way to the rim to score, or stepping up and knocking down threes, something that the NBA world had been criticizing Blake for his lack of ability to do prior to this game, Griffin was carrying Detroit's offense. He wasn't going to let this game go without a fight. Philly, realizing that all they needed to do in order to crush Detroit was put an end to Griffin's onslaught, was throwing every defender they had Griffin's way. But they were all either too slow, too unathletic, or too weak to do a single thing about Blake Griffin. Realizing that they simply didn't have the personnel on the roster to try and slow him down, the best the Sixers could do now was hope that they could match the intensity that Blake was bringing. Their only hope was survival. And they almost did. With under 5 seconds remaining in overtime, despite Griffin piling on 47 points, the Sixers found themselves with a 2-point lead. The ball, however, was in the hands of Blake Griffin, as he stood at the top of the 3-point line waiting for Reggie Bullock to come off a series of screens for a handoff pass. That's what the Sixers thought was going to happen at least. But Griffin had other plans in mind, as he faked the pass, took the ball to the rack himself, counted, and a foul. The NBA world was stunned. The Pistons had managed to defeat the Sixers behind the efforts of a player who was deemed to be too old and too washed up. A player who people thought would start to fade out of the NBA since he wasn't as athletic as he was before. That's it though. Those are 5 of my most memorable performances from this past season. Narrowing the list down to just 5 was extremely hard to do, but with this video already being as long as it is, it was something that I had to do. There are plenty of other moments from this past season that I would like to cover in the future though, some of which were moments shared between teams and not just individual players, and some moments that even extended over a span of games. So if that is something that you'd like to see, then make sure you subscribe to the channel with post notifications turned on so you don't miss out on that, as well as any other videos that are currently in the works. Also, I recently did a podcast with Rusty Buckets. I'll have the link to that down in the description box below. It's a good interview for any of you wanting to know what I was doing when I was away from YouTube. Thank you so much for watching once again though. Be sure to share some of your favorite moments from this past season down in the comment section below. But until next time, keep getting the buckets, Team SDC, and I'm out of here. Peace!